Let's look back at the decade, and the decade in Australian politics is defined by one process. Sources close to the insert camp think they are close to the numbers. Sources in the Y camp say the other camp is lying. Of course, we're talking about the chopping and changing of leaders. Danica De Giorgio looks back at a disgraceful time in Australian politics.
We begin in 2010. Kevin Rudd is Prime Minister. Kevin 07 enjoyed a long period of popularity after his emphatic election win. Hey there, Georgie girl. But discontent within the Labor Party began to rise. Mr Rudd's leadership style alienated senior colleagues following his assessment of climate change as the greatest moral challenge of our time and shelving his emissions trading scheme. Kevin Rudd only ever lost one news poll, having won 84 others, but Labor MPs fed up with his management style seized on the loss. On the 24th of June, the then Deputy Julia Gillard challenged Mr Rudd for the leadership of the Australian Labor Party.
I was elected to do a job. I intend to continue doing that job.
Can I confirm I will be a candidate in tomorrow's ballot, and apart from that statement, I haven't got any other statement at this time.
And she won unopposed after Mr Rudd realised he had lost the support of his colleagues.
I've given it my absolute all. And in that spirit, I'm proud of the achievements that we have delivered to make this country fairer.
Julia Gillard became Australia's first female Prime Minister, starting a new chapter in the history books.
I also certainly acknowledge I have not been elected Prime Minister by the Australian people.
A snap election called for August 21st to capitalise on her popularity. A hard-fought tussle followed on the campaign trail against opposition leader Tony Abbott. On the night, Labor and the Coalition each won 72 seats, 4 short of the requirement for majority government, resulting in the first hung parliament since 1940. 6 crossbenchers held the balance of power. Some enjoyed more than their 5 minutes of fame.
That means confidence and supply in Julia Gillard.
In a now infamous 17-minute speech, independents Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor backed Julia Gillard, allowing her to form a minority government.
Labor is prepared to deliver stable, effective and secure government for the next 3 years.
Despite being deposed, Kevin Rudd wasn't done. In February 2012, amid tensions within the party, he gave a press conference from Washington DC, resigning as Foreign Affairs Minister. The next day, he declared he wished to save Australia from a Tony Abbott-led government. The Prime Minister was quick to call the spill and had the numbers. Mr Rudd forced to the backbench, where he remained silent, but only for a few months.
To do the best for Australia and Labor, things have to change. Rightly or wrongly, Julia has lost the trust of the Australian people.
Miss Gillard began 2013 by seeking to end election speculation, declaring a poll for mid-September. It was a move many considered miscalculated, with the election now entering the equation for every move she made. Mr Rudd and Ms Gillard very publicly turned against each other, culminating on June 26, when Mr Rudd promoted another spill motion.
It is now certain that there will be a leadership ballot at the Labor caucus meeting on Monday.
This time he had the support of nervous marginal seat Labor MPs who faced electoral wipeout in under 3 months' time. Kevin Rudd was victorious and returned to the Prime Ministership.
This afternoon I visited the Governor-General, and Her Excellency has accepted my advice an election be held on Saturday the 7th of September.
The real test of his leadership came down to that poll. In the end, the Australian people voted for a change of government and an end to the tumultuous Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. Tony Abbott sworn in as the nation's 28th Prime Minister. But less than 2 years later, his coalition colleagues sharpened their knives.
We have lost 30 news polls in a row. It is clear that the people have made up their mind.
Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull launched a scathing public attack on Mr Abbott's failures, sparking a leadership spill.
I've decided that the best thing we can do is deal with the spill motion as quickly as possible.
But it was Mr Turnbull with the numbers.
Malcolm Turnbull was successful on 54, Tony Abbott 44.
As you know, the party room a little while ago elected me as leader of the Liberal Party and re-elected Julie as the deputy leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr Abbott had lost the support of the party.
And I want to thank the Australian people for giving me the honour to serve.
In 2016, Prime Minister Turnbull called a double dissolution election in the bid to clear out an uncooperative Senate that blocked much of his policy agenda. He won, but only just. His majority, 1 seat. At the same time, his polling numbers were in free fall.
I mean, I regret making remarks about 30 news polls at the time.
Mr Turnbull ended up losing 39 news polls, a failure of the benchmark he'd set himself.
There are some people who don't support the current leader, and that's quite obvious.
Enter Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton. Mr Turnbull, sensing a challenge coming, declared the party's leadership vacant, forcing both Mr Dutton's hand and the subsequent spill. The Prime Minister managed to survive, but that was just Tuesday. As his cabinet colleagues abandoned him, his position increasingly became untenable.
This is my leader.
There you go.
And I'm ambitious for him.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, Como.
3 days later, a second leadership spill was contested by Scott Morrison, Julie Bishop and Peter Dutton. It was all over for Malcolm Turnbull.
The successful candidate was Scott Morrison.
They wanted to bring the government down. They wanted to bring my Prime Ministership down. Instead of Mr Dutton being Prime Minister, we'll no doubt in due course we'll have Mr Morrison.
And so began a new era with Scott Morrison at the helm after an emphatic election win over Bill Shorten.
I have always believed in miracles.
Ending a decade of spills in Australia's coup capital, Canberra.